Howdy folks! I'm back with you today with a how-to video that's been requested by one of my subscribers. In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to remove and install a bicycle wheel and tire. I'll be using my Roadmaster Granite Peak for this tutorial. Before we begin, there's a few tools that you'll need. This list will change slightly depending on the type of brakes, axle, and tire that you're working with. For starters, you'll need a tire pump, such as the Bell Floornado 550 that I have here. There are several types of pumps on the market, but a floor pump like this is the easiest to use for a bike. The key factor in selecting what pump you need is the type of valve stem that your inner tube has. Some pumps have reversible nozzles, some have two connections on the nozzle, and others may only work for one type of valve. The next thing that you'll need is a set of tire levers, such as these Park Tool TL 1.2 tire levers. For many applications, these or similar levers found at most stores that stock bike accessories will do. Some tires have sidewalls that are significantly stiffer than others, and will be easier to remove with stronger levers that have thinner blades, such as the Park Tool TL 6.2 steel core tire levers shown here. If you're going to be patching a hole in the tube, you'll need a patch kit, such as this Park Tool VP1. These typically contain a piece of sandpaper, a tube of adhesive, and a variety of patches to work on different types of punctures. To save yourself some work and possible worry, the best bet is to replace a punctured tube. Check the wheel diameter and width of your tire to ensure that you get the correct tube. Another factor to consider when purchasing a new tube is what type of valve stem it has. The next few tools are going to depend on the brake, axle, and valve type. The first of which is a small screwdriver or hex wrench. This will be used to aid in deflating a tube with a Schrader valve. This is due to the needle in the valve stem that needs to be pressed in order to release the air pressure. Presta valves have an external needle, so no tools are needed to deflate the tube. The next configuration-dependent tool is either a socket wrench and socket, open-end wrench, or combination wrench for the axle nuts. Typically, these will be 15mm, but I have run into 17mm and 19mm axle nuts. Through axles may need a hex wrench to fine-tune the tightness of the axle, while a quick-release axle will not need any tools at all. If your bike has rim brakes, the last tool you'll need is a cable stretcher or fourth hand, such as the Park Tool BT2 cable stretcher. If you're not going to be working with brakes often or don't have a cable stretcher available, a pair of pliers will work fine. Be advised that pliers can damage the cables. Additionally, you may need a 10mm socket, a 15 or 16mm cone wrench or flat wrench, and or a 5mm hex wrench. Now that we have all of our tools ready, we need to get the bike into a position where we can work on it. A bicycle maintenance stand would be ideal, but they can be pretty expensive. In the absence of a maintenance stand, turning the bike upside down so it sits on its seat and handlebars is sufficient. Once the bike is in position, we need to check the rear sprocket if the bike has multiple gears on the rear wheel. If so, spin the pedals to ensure that the shifter has not been moved since the last time that the bike was ridden. In this case, it's on the largest sprocket, which is the easiest of the rear gears to pedal. We want it to be on the smallest sprocket, which is the hardest of the rear gears to pedal. We want this to release some of the tension from the chain, allow the derailleur more room to move, and to make the rear wheel easier to remove from the bike. To get the chain where you want it, pedal the bike and shift the rear gears until the chain is riding smoothly on the smallest rear sprocket. If you have rim brakes, you'll need to move the pads out of the way of the tire before continuing on. To do this, pull the rubber boot back, squeeze the top of the brake arms until the cable can be pulled free from the arms using the metal tube, called the noodle. If there's not enough cable between the two arms, you'll have to use your 10mm socket to loosen the nut that tightens the cable down to the arm and pull the cable a bit. This will make releasing the cable from its cradle easier. Once the brakes have been moved out of the way of the wheel, loosen the axle nuts on both sides of the wheel. Next, gently straighten out the derailleur and pull the wheel out of the slots in the frame, which are called dropouts. If you have a quick release, pull the lever on the non-drive side of the bike out, turn the lever to the left a few turns until it's loose enough to remove it from the frame, and continue as you would on a bike equipped with axle nuts. With the wheel removed from the bike, the tube needs to be deflated. With a press valve, remove the dust cap if it has one. Next, turn the tip of the valve counterclockwise until it stops, then press down on the tip towards the wheel to deflate the tube. Once deflated, remove the retaining nut that rests next to the wheel by turning it counterclockwise. If you have a Schrader valve, remove the cap and use the screwdriver or hex wrench to press on the needle inside the valve to deflate the tube. Once the tube has been deflated, take one of the tire levers and insert the spoon or bladed part of the lever underneath the bead of the tire with the tip of the blade pointing towards the tread. Push the hooked end of the lever towards the spokes to pull the tire away from the rim. Once you have the section of tire where your lever is pulled away from the wheel, slide the lever around the rim to remove the rest of the tire on that side. Sometimes, a part of the tire that you've already removed will want to slip back on the rim, or it requires too much force to slide the lever around the rim. If this happens, leave the blade of the lever in place and hook the other end of the lever to the nearest spoke. Once you have the lever secured to the spoke, grab a second lever, insert it under the tire like you did the first, and continue around the rim until the first side of the tire comes off the rim. Once one side of the tire has been removed from the rim, pull the valve stem through its hole. Once the valve stem is clear of the rim, continue to pull the rest of the tube from the wheel. If you're repairing or replacing the tube, but not the tire itself, you can stop the tire removal at this point and move on to the reinstallation after the tube is installed back in the tire. If you're replacing the tire or changing the wheels, continue on with the tire removal. To finish removing the tire from the rim, insert the tire lever through the side that's already been removed, putting the blade of the lever outside the tire on the side that is yet to be removed, and work your way around the rim like you did with the first side, using a second lever if needed. Before installing the new tire, take note of the directional rotation arrow on the sidewall of the tire. Most tires on the market are designed to roll in a certain direction and must be installed in such a manner that they can do so. If a tire doesn't have the arrow on the sidewall like this one does, look at the tread pattern, as it may form an arrow that will point to the front of the bike when viewed from the top. An easy way to determine which way the arrow should be pointing is to put the tire next to the bike with the arrow at the top of the bike. If you're working on the bike upside down like I am here, the arrow will be near the ground. The arrow will need to point towards the front of the bike. In this situation, when the rear gears are facing you, the arrow will be pointing left if it's at the bottom of the wheel, and right if it's at the top of the wheel. If you're changing the tire on the front wheel, you can put the tire on in any direction and ensure it's pointing the correct way when the wheel is installed on the bike. Once proper tire orientation has been determined, start installing the new tire by pressing one side of the tire over the rim on the side opposite to where it will be once the tire is completely installed. Start by pressing one area of the tire in, then work your way around the wheel like you did when removing the tire. You may be able to do this by hand, but if it gets too tight to do so, grab a tire lever and insert it the same way you did when removing the tire and slide it around the wheel. Except this time, you'll insert it with the blade pointing towards the rim. Check again to ensure that the tire is being mounted in the correct orientation. If not, remove the tire, make the needed adjustments, and remount one side of the tire. With one side of the tire installed on the rim, inflate the tube just enough to give it a little bit of shape, and insert the valve stem through the hole in the wheel. Once the valve stem is through the hole, push the tube above the stem into the tire and work your way around the rim, pushing the remainder of the tube into the tire. If your tube has a Presta valve, reinstall the retaining nut. Using your fingers, rotate the nut clockwise on the stem until it rests up against the rim. You don't need to tighten it any more than finger tight. Once the tube is in the tire, exercise caution to prevent tube punctures while completing the remainder of the tire installation process. To get the last side of the tire on the rim, push the sidewall of the tire into the rim the same way you did with the other side. If at any point it gets too tight to press in by hand, grab a tire lever, cautiously insert it under the tire with the blade pointing towards the rim, and slide it around the wheel until the tire is completely on the rim. Ensure that the tube is not sticking out from under the tire anywhere on the rim. If it is, push it back under the tire. Before inflating the tire, check the sidewall of the tire for the manufacturer's recommended tire pressure. On my Granite Peak, it's recommended to inflate the tire to 50 psi. To attach the pump to the valve stem, ensure that the lever on the pump nozzle is down and that you've identified the correct nozzle hole or setting for your valve stem. This bike has a Schrader valve, so we'll be using the large hole on the pump nozzle. If your bike has a Presta valve, you'll use the smaller hole. Once you've identified the correct hole or setting for your bike, slide the pump nozzle over the valve stem and lift the nozzle's lever up to lock it in place. Now that the pump's nozzle is locked onto the valve stem, inflate the tire to the recommended pressure. As a warning, it is normal to hear a few pops and creaks from the wheel and tire while inflating it, especially if you're using an air compressor. As long as you're not overinflating the tire, this is fine. Once the tire is inflated, look for a line on the tire just above the rim. Follow it all the way around the tire and check to ensure that it is the same distance from the rim all the way around the tire on both sides. It should be at this point, but if it's not, remove some of the air from the tube, adjust the tire, and reinflate it. After the tire is inflated to the correct pressure and is aligned properly on the rim, you can reinstall the wheel on the bike. To do this on a bike with rim brakes and axle nuts, gently push the derailleur up and out of the way, put the axle through the chain ensuring that the chain will rest on the smallest gear, and slide the axle into the dropouts, release the derailleur, center the wheel keeping in mind that it may be a bit offset to the gears, which is okay. Hand tighten the axle nuts while holding the wheel in place. Release the wheel and check for proper alignment. If it is not properly aligned when the nuts are finger tight, loosen the nuts, make the needed corrections, finger tighten them, and check the wheel alignment again. Once correctly aligned, finish tightening the nuts with your wrench. On a bike with disc brakes and quick release axles, gently push the derailleur up and out of the way, put the axle through the chain, ensuring that the chain will rest on the smallest gear, align the disc brake rotor with the caliper, slide the rotor into the caliper, slide the quick release axle into the dropouts, and release the derailleur. To tighten the axle, grab the nut on the drive side with one hand and the lever on the non-drive side with the other. Turn the lever clockwise to tighten. Press the lever with the palm of your hand toward the frame to secure the lever. It should take enough force to leave an imprint in your hand. If it's too tight or not tight enough, continue turning the lever. If you reach a point where you can't get it just right with the lever, you can make finer adjustments by turning the nut. Once the wheel is installed, turn the pedals to check that the chain is turning freely. If it is, turn the pedals and shift the gears to a lower gear so it's easier to get started the next time you ride. On a bike with disc brakes, you're done. If you have rim brakes, you need to close the gap between the pads and wheel by reinstalling the noodle. If you had to loosen the cable to remove the noodle, install the noodle, squeeze the brake arms to a point that there's about a coin's thickness between the pads and rim, then pull the cable tight and secure the nut. Squeeze the brake lever a few times to ensure that both brake arms are moving an equal amount on both sides. Spin the wheel to make sure it spins freely and that brake pads are not dragging on it. Adjust the brakes as needed and you're done. This video is already running pretty long, so I won't cover adjusting the brakes here. The front tire is done in the same way, but without the fuss of messing with the derailleur and gears, as well as that you can install the tire on the rim in any direction as long as you pay attention to the correct rotation when installing the wheel. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and click the bell icon to be among the first to be notified when I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.